The last thing my mother said to me before she died was, "Be kind, even when others aren't." I didn't know that kindness would become the very thing people used to destroy me. I still remember the sound that morning, the slam of the wooden cabinet door, the sharp clatter of dishes. My stepmother, Linda, stood there in her perfect pressed blouse, her eyes cutting through me like I was dirt on her kitchen floor. "You should have gone with her that night," she hissed. For a moment, I didn't understand. Then it hit me. She meant the night my mom died. That was the moment I realized something inside me had snapped. My hands were shaking as I wiped the counter, pretending I hadn't heard her. The air smelled like burnt toast and coffee, stale, bitter, suffocating. My father wasn't home. He'd left early for work like always, pretending that if he stayed busy enough, grief wouldn't find him. And Linda, well, she had found her way into every space my mother once filled. It had only been 6 months since Mom's funeral, but Linda had already replaced the family photos with her own smiling face. She wore Mom's jewelry around the house, said she found it in a drawer. Every time I tried to speak up, my father would sigh and tell me, "Sarah, don't start again." "She's trying." Trying? She was trying to erase my mother's existence. I was 26 at the time, juggling 2 part-time jobs while studying to finish my degree. I couldn't afford my own place yet, so I stayed in the house my mom and dad had bought together, now redecorated in beige and lavender, Linda's favorite colors. At first, I told myself to keep the peace, to stay invisible. But every week, she found a new way to remind me that I didn't belong there. Like the time she threw out my mom's teacups by accident. Or the day she told my dad, "Sarah's too comfortable freeloading here. Maybe she needs to grow up." And my dad, he didn't defend me. He just rubbed his forehead and said, "Let's not fight." That silence broke something in me deeper than her words ever could. One night, I overheard them in the living room. Linda's voice was low but sharp, like she didn't care if I heard. "She's an expense, Tom. A grown woman still living off us. She needs to learn responsibility." My father mumbled something, probably trying to calm her, but she cut him off. "If you won't handle it, I will." I remember sitting on the stairs, gripping the banister, so tight my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. Not that time. I just stared at the wall and felt nothing. That numbness scared me. Because when pain stops hurting, something darker takes its place. A few days later, I came home from work, exhausted, and found my things piled in boxes near the door. Linda stood there, arms crossed, smiling. "I thought I'd help you pack. You said your friend Jen had a couch you could use, right?" My throat went dry. "I hadn't said anything like that." "You're lying," I whispered. She shrugged. "Your dad agreed. He'll be home later." I stood there, staring at her, and something inside me, that last flicker of kindness my mom had raised me with, flickered out. That night I left. No big fight, no tears. Just silence and a car full of boxes that smelled like old memories and heartbreak. I stayed at Jen's for a few weeks, sleeping on her couch, pretending everything was fine. But when I opened my laptop one morning to check my bank account, I realized Linda had done more than throw me out. My mother's savings, the account she'd left in my name, was empty. Every cent gone. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, as the reality sank in. Linda had stolen from me, and my father had signed off on it. I remember that moment vividly. The taste of cold coffee in my mouth, the hum of the fridge in Jen's kitchen, the way my chest felt tight like I couldn't breathe. That was the day I stopped being the victim. That was the day I decided to get justice. Not the screaming, throwing things kind of revenge. The quiet kind. The patient kind. The kind that leaves people wondering how they ever thought you were weak. I closed my laptop slowly, and for the first time in months, I smiled. They thought they'd broken me. They had no idea what I was capable of. You know that feeling when everything around you is spinning, but your mind suddenly becomes crystal clear? That's what it felt like the day I found my mother's account empty. The shock lasted maybe 5 minutes. Then came the anger. Sharp, focused, almost comforting. It gave me something to hold on to. I didn't call my father. I didn't message Linda. I knew both of them would have excuses ready, maybe even fake tears. I'd seen her manipulate him before. She'd twist every word I said until I was the ungrateful daughter again. So I decided to stay quiet. Jen, my friend, thought I was just trying to move on. She'd say, "Sarah, you need to let it go. They're toxic. You're free now." But I wasn't free. Not when Linda had stolen the last piece of my mother's love, her savings. My mom had worked 2 jobs to build that account. She used to call it my safety net. She'd say, "If anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll use this to start your own life." And Linda took that from me. For the next few days, I replayed everything, every comment, every sneer, every fake smile. I realized Linda wasn't careless or emotional. She was calculated. She'd probably been planning this for months. So I started my own plan. The first step was information. I logged into the shared online banking system Mom had used. The account was closed, but there were digital traces, statements, transfers, timestamps. I noticed the money hadn't vanished overnight. It had been withdrawn in smaller chunks over 2 months. Each transfer went to a secondary joint account, the one my father shared with Linda. That told me one thing. She didn't just steal, she made it look legal. My father's signature was on every withdrawal. But I knew him. He never read fine print. He signed whatever she put in front of him. I printed every statement, every timestamp, every tiny clue. I didn't know exactly what I'd do with it yet, but I knew this much: if I wanted justice, I needed proof. Jen noticed the late nights, the notes all over her coffee table, my laptop glowing past midnight. She asked me once, "Are you planning something?" I looked at her and said, "No, just sorting through old paperwork." But inside, I was preparing for war. The next thing I did was go to the lawyer who had handled my mother's will years ago, Mr. Peterson. He'd been a friend of my mom's, and I trusted him. I didn't tell him everything at first, just asked hypothetically. If a joint account beneficiary misuses funds left by a deceased parent, is there a way to trace or challenge it? He looked at me over his glasses. "You're talking about your stepmother, aren't you?" I hesitated, then nodded. He sighed and said, "If you can prove coercion, or that your father signed under misrepresentation, you might have a case. But you'll need solid evidence, not just suspicion." That word, evidence, stuck with me. I started digging deeper. Emails, documents, even texts from my dad's phone that had synced to the family laptop. I remembered Mom's habit of backing up everything on a shared drive before she died. I logged into that old drive one night. The password was still her birthday, and there it was, a folder named Legal Docs. Inside were letters, statements, even a draft of her will. But the will she'd filed officially wasn't the same one I was looking at. The version on the drive listed me as the sole beneficiary. The filed version? It split everything between me and my father. The version Linda had somehow managed to help file after Mom's death. That was it. That was my proof. My mom had meant for me to inherit her savings directly. Linda had tampered with that process, changed it just enough to give herself control through my dad. I remember staring at the screen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I whispered, "Mom, I'm going to fix this. I promise." The next morning, I scheduled an appointment with Mr. Peterson again, this time, not hypothetically. I walked into his office with a folder full of papers, a USB drive, and trembling hands. He looked through it all, quiet and focused, then finally said, "You've got something real here, Sarah." That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark at Jen's place, replaying how far Linda had pushed me. Every insult, every manipulation, every fake smile. I wasn't scared anymore. I was calm. Calm in a way that comes right before a storm. The next step was confronting my father, not to plead, not to cry, but to let him know what was coming. I texted him that I need to talk. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. Please be home. He replied instantly, "Of course, honey. Linda and I will make dinner." Perfect. If he was going to hear the truth, she was going to hear it too. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Sharper eyes, steadier hands. She wasn't the girl who cried on the stairs anymore. She was someone who'd learned to fight back quietly. When I pulled up to my father's house the next evening, the porch lights were already on. Through the window, I could see Linda setting the table like it was some kind of celebration. My stomach tightened. She was smiling too much. I parked across the street, sat for a second, and let the quiet hum of the car fill my ears. My heartbeat felt louder than the engine. I kept replaying Mr. Peterson's words. "You've got something real here." I walked up the driveway, clutching the folder under my arm. My fingers were cold even though the night air was warm. Linda opened the door before I could knock. "Sarah," she said in that sugar-coated voice. "So glad you could join us. I made your favorite, roast chicken." She said it like we were family, like she hadn't thrown me out just weeks before. I stepped inside, forcing a polite smile. "Thanks, Linda." Dad was sitting at the table, his glasses halfway down his nose, scrolling through something on his phone. He looked tired, older than I remembered. When he saw me, he stood up and hugged me quickly, like he was afraid to show affection in front of her. "Good to see you, honey," he said. "You too, Dad." We sat down. I didn't touch the food. I just watched them. Linda kept talking about some new furniture she wanted to buy, how she found it on sale, and how she'd been managing the finances really well lately. That line made my skin crawl. Finally, I said, "Speaking of finances, I wanted to talk about Mom's account." The room went quiet. The air felt heavy, like it had thickened. Linda froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. My dad looked up, frowning. "What about it?" he asked. I took out the folder, slid a few papers across the table. "It's empty. Every cent." And I traced where it went. Linda's smile didn't even flicker. She just leaned back in her chair. "Sarah, we discussed this. Your mother wanted to help with household expenses before she passed. Your father and I—" "No," I interrupted. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "She didn't. I have her draft will. The real one. She left that money for me." My dad blinked, confused. "That's not possible, sweetheart." "The lawyer. The lawyer you and Linda went to after she died?" I said sharply. "Yeah. He filed a different version. One Linda conveniently edited before you signed." Linda laughed softly, that fake polished laugh she used when she was caught off guard. "Oh, Sarah, you really should stop imagining things. Your mother's death was hard on all of us. Don't make it worse." But her hands were trembling. I slid another document toward my father. "That's your signature on the withdrawals. You didn't read what you signed, did you?" He looked down. His eyes darted over the paper. His face fell. "Linda, what is this?" She started to say something, but I cut her off again. "Before you try to lie, you should know, I've already spoken to Mr. Peterson. He's prepared to reopen the case. He said the bank logs alone are enough to trigger an investigation." For the first time, Linda's voice cracked. "You wouldn't do that. It would ruin your father." "No," I said. "It would ruin you." The silence that followed was suffocating. My dad looked at her, then at me, then back at the papers. I could see it, the realization dawning on him like a slow sunrise of regret. He whispered, "Linda, tell me she's wrong." She didn't. Instead, she stood up abruptly, pushing her chair back so hard it scraped the floor. "I don't have to listen to this." She grabbed her purse and stormed down the hallway. The front door slammed. My dad stayed seated, staring at the table. He looked smaller somehow, like a man who'd just watched his whole life collapse in front of him. "Dad," I said quietly, "I didn't want to do this here. But she took everything Mom left for me." He rubbed his face. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I believed him, partly. He wasn't evil, just weak. That's the worst part about betrayal. It's not always hatred that destroys you. Sometimes it's cowardice. He asked, "What happens now?" I took a deep breath. "Mr. Peterson's filing the paperwork. I'm not pressing charges yet, but I'm freezing all accounts that had Mom's name on them. Linda can explain the rest to the bank." He nodded slowly, his eyes watery. "You're more like your mother than I thought." That night, I left before Linda came back. I didn't look behind me as I closed the door. I thought that would be the end of it, a quiet victory. But people like Linda don't go down quietly. A week later, I found out she'd decided to fight back. She filed a report, claiming I had forged documents and tried to steal from her. When I read the letter from her lawyer, I almost laughed. Almost. This wasn't over. The envelope was thick, heavier than it should have been. I remember standing by the mailbox, my fingers trembling as I tore it open. Inside was a formal letter from Linda's lawyer, accusing me of forgery, misrepresentation, and emotional harassment. I actually laughed, a short, bitter sound that startled even me. Linda wasn't just fighting back. She was trying to destroy me. That evening, I sat in Jen's kitchen with the letter spread out on the counter. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. I just stared at the words until they blurred. Jen walked in, drying her hands. "What's that?" I handed her the letter. She read a few lines, her eyes widening. "She's serious?" "Sarah, this is insane." "Yeah," I said quietly. "It's her move. Now it's my turn." Because as cruel as that letter was, it told me something important. Linda was scared. She wouldn't go this far if she wasn't. I called Mr. Peterson first thing in the morning. He sounded calm, like he'd been expecting this. "Sarah," he said, "this is a desperate move. Don't panic. We'll respond with evidence." "I have everything," I said. "Every document, every signature, every digital trace." He chuckled softly. "Then she's already lost. But she's counting on intimidation. Don't give her that satisfaction." Still, I couldn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying old scenes. My stepmother laughing at my mother's funeral, calling it a beautiful ceremony, then whispering to someone about catering costs. The way she once said, "Your mom was sentimental. I'm practical." And how my father had just nodded. The next morning, I went to my father's house again. Not for revenge, not for drama, but for truth. He opened the door slowly, eyes tired. "Sarah, I got a letter," I said. "From her lawyer." He didn't look surprised. "She said she would. Did you tell her to?" I asked. He shook his head quickly. "No. She's been different lately. Stressed. Paranoid." I walked past him into the living room. Half of the house looked half empty, her things missing from the shelves, clothes gone from the hallway hooks. "Where is she?" I asked. He sighed. "At her sister's. She said she needs time away." Good. Time was exactly what I needed too. "Dad," I said, "I'm not backing down this time. I have every right to what Mom left me. And I'm not scared of Linda's lies." He nodded weakly. "I know. You shouldn't be. When I left, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. Just focused." For the next week, I gathered everything. Printed call logs, screenshots, copies of emails between Linda and the estate lawyer, even a few old photos that proved she'd been accessing documents from my mother's office. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep her manipulation ran. She hadn't just stolen money. She'd convinced my father to sign forms transferring joint ownership of the house too. I remember staring at that deed record online, my pulse in my ears. The house my mother had designed, every corner, every piece of furniture, now legally half Linda's. That's when I stopped thinking about justice and started thinking about strategy. Because the truth is, Linda didn't care about money as much as she cared about control. She wanted to win, to feel superior. So I decided to give her exactly what she wanted, the illusion of victory. Through Mr. Peterson, I filed a formal response to her lawyer. "I am willing to negotiate out of court if Mrs. Linda Sanders agrees to return the withdrawn funds and withdraws her claim of harassment." The word negotiate was bait, and she took it. 2 days later, I got an email, short and smug. "Let's discuss terms, Sarah. It's time you learned how adults handle responsibility. Linda." I stared at that line for a long time. My reflection in the laptop screen looked nothing like the girl who used to shrink under her voice. We met at her lawyer's office the following Friday. I remember walking in wearing a plain black blazer and jeans. Linda sat across the table, in a pearl necklace and a too-tight smile. Her lawyer started talking, something about misunderstandings and emotional distress, but I cut him off. "Linda," I said quietly, "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to finish this." She smirked. "You'll drop the claims then?" I slid a USB drive across the table. "That's a backup of everything I have, signed documents, bank records, voice memos, emails. I've also shared it with 2 different legal contacts, in case anything happens to me or my evidence." The color drained from her face. Her lawyer cleared his throat nervously. Miss, there's no need for. There's every need, I said. You wanted to fight dirty? I learned from the best. Linda sat there frozen, her lips trembling. She finally whispered, You wouldn't dare. I leaned in calm. Try me. The room went silent. Even her lawyer avoided eye contact. That was the first time I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. And it was strangely satisfying. After a long pause, she muttered, What do you want? I want what's mine, I said. Every dollar. And I want you to stay out of my life forever. She didn't agree right away. But she didn't say no either. That night, I walked out of that building with shaking hands, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of standing up for myself. But I had no idea that the real storm was still coming. Because when people like Linda realize they're losing control, they don't surrender. They strike harder. 2 days after that meeting, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop. Dozens of missed calls, texts, and one message from my boss that made my stomach drop. Sarah, we need to talk. Call me ASAP. I called immediately, still half asleep. Is everything okay? He sighed. Look, I don't know what's going on in your personal life, but someone sent an email to the office claiming you were under investigation for fraud and theft. It came from an anonymous account. I had to suspend you until it's sorted. For a second, I couldn't even speak. My chest tightened. Linda. It had to be Linda. The woman wasn't just trying to steal my money. Now she was trying to steal my reputation. I hung up, sat on the edge of my bed, and just stared at the floor. The morning light streamed through the blinds, and the world looked calm, peaceful, like it had no idea my life was falling apart again. Jen knocked softly on my door. You okay? I handed her the phone. She read the message, her face tightening. She's out of control, Sarah. You need to end this. I will, I said quietly. But not the way she expects. I spent the rest of the day collecting everything again. Not just financial proof, but behavioral proof. Texts, voicemails, the fake account she'd used once to follow me online. I cross-referenced the anonymous email headers my boss forwarded to me. Guess what? The IP address matched Linda's town. That was all I needed. I took it to Mr. Peterson again. He listened quietly, then said, You realize this has gone beyond inheritance. This is defamation, harassment, criminal territory. I know, I said. I'm done playing nice. He nodded slowly. Then it's time to let her bury herself. He explained what to do, not to respond to her directly, but to keep documenting every interaction. Let her rage publicly while I stayed quiet. Let her create her own evidence. And that's exactly what happened. Within a week, Linda sent angry emails to my father, accusing me of turning him against her, of ruining her life. She posted online about ungrateful stepchildren who manipulate old men for money. She didn't mention my name, but everyone who knew us knew who she meant. I didn't react. Not one word. Instead, I forwarded everything to Mr. Peterson. He filed a cease and desist notice the next morning, with all screenshots attached. That silence broke her faster than any argument ever could. By the end of that week, her lawyer called mine, not to threaten, but to settle. She wanted to make it go away quietly. Of course she did. But I wasn't done yet. When we met again in that same cold office, Linda looked nothing like before. Her hair messy, makeup gone, her confidence cracked. She didn't even look me in the eye. Her lawyer started, My client is willing to return the full amount withdrawn from the account, as well as relinquish her share in the family property. In return, your client agrees not to pursue further legal action. I looked at her, this woman who'd made my life hell for months, and asked, Why? Why did you do it? Her lips quivered. Because your father loved you more. For a second, I almost pitied her. Almost. But then I remembered the night she called me a burden, the day she threw out my mother's things, the years she spent pretending I didn't exist. So I said, That's something you can't steal. The agreement was signed 2 days later. My mother's savings were returned, the deed corrected, and Linda officially removed from any financial claim tied to our family. It should have felt like victory. But when I walked out of the lawyer's office, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like release. Because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just the quiet sound of reclaiming what's yours. A few days later, my father called. His voice was soft, broken. She left, he said. Took her things and moved out. Good, I said simply. He paused. Sarah, I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. But I said, I know, Dad. Just don't let anyone take advantage of you again. That night, I went back to my old room, the one that had once felt like a prison, and stood in the doorway. It smelled faintly like dust and lemon cleaner. Most of my mom's things were gone, but the memories weren't. I opened the small box I'd kept under the bed. Old photos, a dried rose, her handwriting on a recipe card. And for the first time since she died, I didn't cry. I whispered, It's over, Mom. You can rest now. But the truth? It wasn't completely over. Because Linda still had one last card to play, one I didn't see coming. It started with a phone call. Unknown number. 9:42 p.m. I hesitated before answering, my hand hovering over the screen. Hello. A pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in weeks. My father's trembling. Sarah. She's threatening to go to the press. I closed my eyes. What? She said she's going to tell everyone you blackmailed her. She said she has proof. My chest went tight. Of course she did. Linda never lost quietly. She had to make noise, even if it meant burning herself with me. I took a deep breath. Dad, don't engage. Don't say a word to her. He sighed heavily. She called my work, Sarah. My boss heard everything. That night, I sat in my apartment with every light off, staring at my reflection in the black window glass. For the first time, I realized Linda wasn't after money anymore. She wanted to destroy my peace. But what she didn't know is that I'd already set a trap for her weeks ago. Remember that USB drive I gave her during our first meeting? That wasn't the only copy. There was another one I'd sent to Mr. Peterson's assistant, time-stamped, notarized, and stored securely. And more importantly, there was an email chain between her and her first lawyer, one she probably thought I'd never seen. In it, she had written, He'll sign whatever I put in front of him. Once the money moves, the girl can't prove a thing. That line was my insurance. I hadn't used it yet. I was saving it for when she went too far. And she just had. The next morning, I called a friend who worked for a local paper, not the kind that thrived on gossip, but the kind that loved facts. I told her everything. I didn't ask her to write a story, just to verify mine. She did. She confirmed the bank withdrawals, the falsified will version, even the complaint Linda had filed against me, and how quickly it was dismissed when the documents didn't hold up. 3 days later, Linda's exclusive tell-all leaked online, except it didn't go the way she planned. The outlet she'd contacted fact-checked her claims and, thanks to the file I'd sent the journalist, they ran a piece titled, Daughter Fights Back After Stepmother Alters Will, Truth Behind the Family Feud. The article didn't mention our names, but anyone who knew us understood immediately. Linda called me that night, screaming into the phone. You think you won? You think people will believe you? I let her finish, then said calmly, They already do. There was a long silence. I could hear her breathing hard, almost panting. Then she whispered, You're just like her. Thank you, I said and hung up. That was the last time we ever spoke. Over the next month, things settled. My father quietly divorced her. She moved out of town. Nobody knew where. And I finally got the official notice from the bank. Account reinstated. Funds restored. When I logged in and saw my mother's savings back in my name, I broke down for the first time. Not from sadness, but from the weight lifting off me. I went to the cemetery that weekend. It was cloudy, a soft drizzle falling on the grass. I knelt beside my mother's headstone and whispered, It's done, Mom. She can't hurt us anymore. The wind blew through the trees, cold but clean. I closed my eyes and breathed it in. That was the moment I realized revenge wasn't about hurting someone back. It was about reclaiming what they stole from you. Your dignity, your power, your voice. And I had done that. I didn't walk away smiling. I walked away free. Months later, when my father asked me to have dinner, I said yes. He'd started therapy, joined a grief group, and was learning to cook again. The house looked different now. Smaller, quieter, but peaceful. Over dinner, he said softly, I should have believed you earlier. I looked at him and said, You see it now. That's what matters. He nodded, eyes misty. Your mother would be proud. I smiled faintly. I hope so. That night, as I drove home, I thought about everything. The lies, the betrayal, the nights I cried alone, and the day I finally stood up for myself. It didn't feel like a happy ending. It felt like closure. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you, you'll understand. Closure is the real victory. Because sometimes justice doesn't look like a courtroom win or public apology. Sometimes it's just the peace that comes when you stop being afraid. I lost my stepmother, but I found myself. It's strange how quiet life becomes after the storm. You spend so long fighting to survive that when peace finally comes, it almost feels unnatural. A year had passed since that final phone call with Linda. A full year since the lies, the court threats, and the sleepless nights. Sometimes I still woke up half expecting a new email, a new accusation, a new way for her to crawl back into my life. But none came. She was gone. For real this time. After everything, I decided not to go back to the same old life. That job that suspended me? I left it. I didn't even fight to return. It wasn't worth staying where my name could be questioned so easily. Instead, I started something small, something mine. My mother's savings became the seed money for a small event planning business. Mom had always loved hosting. She used to say, if you can make people feel seen, you've already given them something they'll remember. So that's what I did. It started with small local weddings and charity dinners. Then, within 6 months, clients started finding me through word of mouth. I worked from my apartment, filled it with plants and light, and for the first time, I felt alive again. Sometimes my dad would stop by, bringing coffee and muffins from the bakery down the street. We'd sit on the balcony, not saying much, just being there. The guilt never completely left his face, but it softened. Once, he said quietly, "You know, I finally read your mother's old journals. She wrote about how proud she was of you. Said you'd always find your own way, even if it was through fire." I smiled, blinking back tears. She wasn't wrong. He chuckled. You really are her daughter. It took a while, but I forgave him, not with words, but with time. I saw how hard he was trying to rebuild. He sold the house, moved to a smaller place, and started volunteering at a local community center. We were healing, in our own imperfect way, but trauma has a way of lingering quietly. Sometimes when I'd pass a mirror, I'd catch a glimpse of my reflection and still expect to see that broken girl, the one who stood at the top of the stairs, hearing her stepmother call her a burden. I'd stare back at that reflection and whisper, "Not anymore." A few months later, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. Just one line. "I heard you're doing well. I'm sorry for everything." No name. But I didn't need one. It was her. I stared at the message for a long time, my finger hovering over the screen. Then I did the one thing I knew would finally set me free. I deleted it. No reply. No closure needed. Because forgiveness isn't about letting them back in. It's about letting yourself move forward. That night, I visited Mom's grave again. The air was cool, the sky painted in fading shades of gold and gray. I sat down, brushed the leaves off her headstone, and said, "You were right. Kindness doesn't mean letting people walk over you. It means choosing peace when revenge has already done its job." The wind picked up softly like an answer. I stood up, feeling lighter. On my way back to the car, I saw a little girl with her mom by another grave. The girl was holding a bunch of wildflowers, smiling as she placed them down. It made me think, maybe that's what life is. Losing, rebuilding, and remembering how to smile again. When I got home, I poured a glass of wine, sat by my window, and opened my journal. The first page read, "For Mom, the woman who taught me strength, and for Linda, the woman who tested it." I wrote below it, "If pain made me stronger, peace made me wise." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the girl who was wronged. I felt like the woman who survived. I didn't go looking for what happened to her. But life has a way of letting the truth find you when you're finally ready to see it. It was a gray Thursday morning, one of those quiet, rain tapping the window kind of days. I was in my office, arranging floral samples for a client's event, when Jen walked in with her phone in her hand. "Sarah," she said cautiously, "you might want to sit down." My stomach dropped. What happened? She turned the screen toward me. There it was, a local news article with a headline that made my pulse slow. Former accountant charged with financial misconduct and fraudulent activity. And right below that, Linda Sanders, 52. I didn't speak for a full minute. My eyes just traced every line, every word. Apparently, after moving out of town, she'd taken a job at a small real estate firm. Within months, they caught irregularities, forged invoices, missing deposits, altered expense records. It was the same pattern, the same tricks. Only this time she did it to the wrong people. Her former boss had pressed charges. The investigation was still ongoing, but the evidence was strong. Jen waited, her eyes searching mine. "Are you okay?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I am." I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. What I felt was stillness, like watching a storm from far away, no longer inside it, but remembering what it felt like when it tore through your house. "She didn't change," Jen said softly. "She just found a new victim." "People like her don't change," I said. "They just find softer walls to push against, until they hit one that doesn't move." I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work, but the image of her, once smug and untouchable, sitting under the harsh light of an interrogation room wouldn't leave my mind. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her. After all, she'd once been a woman who loved someone enough to marry him, who smiled in family photos, who tried to build something out of grief too. But pity isn't the same as forgiveness. Later that week, I got a call from my father. I could tell from the tone of his voice that he'd seen the same article. "I didn't think she'd ever fall this far," he said quietly. I didn't respond right away. Then I said, "Maybe it's what it took for her to finally see herself." He sighed. "I just wish none of this had touched us." "It had to," I said. "Some lessons don't come cheap." He chuckled weakly. "You sound like your mother." "Good," I said, smiling. "That means I'm doing something right." After the call, I sat by the window and watched the rain turn to a drizzle. And I realized something important. Justice doesn't always arrive when you're fighting for it. Sometimes, it comes after you've already made peace. Weeks passed, and I didn't check the news again. I didn't need to know the verdict. I didn't need closure. Because Linda's story wasn't mine anymore. But one morning, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single folded note, no signature, just one line written in a shaky hand. "You were right about me." I stared at it for a long time, then placed it in my drawer, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder that people can spend their whole lives lying to others, until the day they finally run out of lies for themselves. That night, I went for a walk, the same route my mother and I used to take when I was a teenager. The world smelled like rain and earth. I passed the little pond where she once told me, "Peace isn't something you wait for, Sarah. It's something you decide to have." I finally understood what she meant. Because even though Linda's story was ending, mine was still being written, one calm, quiet chapter at a time. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't come with music swelling in the background or some grand cinematic moment. It happens slowly. In the mornings you wake up without panic. In the nights you finally sleep without replaying everything that broke you. That's what the year after Linda's downfall looked like for me. Quiet repair. I focused on my business, pouring myself into it like therapy. Each event I planned, every client I made smile, it all helped patch a small part of me that she had torn apart. People started calling my events feel-good moments. I think it's because I made sure no one ever felt invisible the way I once did. My father came to almost every event. He'd help with small things, hanging lights, moving boxes, handing out programs. He said it made him feel close to Mom again. I didn't stop him. Watching him find purpose again was its own kind of healing. One evening, after a big corporate event downtown, I met someone, Daniel. He was part of the catering team, funny in that quiet, unforced way. We started talking as we packed up tables, laughing over a spilled tray of desserts. He didn't know my story, not yet. And for once, I liked that. He treated me like a person, not a victim, not someone broken, not someone he had to fix. Just me. We started meeting for coffee after work. Then dinners. Then long walks by the river. He asked questions, but never the wrong ones. He didn't dig into the past. He was more interested in where I was going. One night, under the soft yellow light of a street lamp, he asked, "Do you ever miss her?" "Your stepmother, I mean." It caught me off guard. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. "No," I said slowly. "But I miss who I could have been if she hadn't hurt me." He nodded gently. "Then maybe now's your chance to be her." It was such a simple line, but it stuck with me. Over the next few months, I started doing things I'd put off for years. I painted again, traveled, took a solo weekend trip to the coast, something I'd always wanted to do with Mom. I even started volunteering at a local shelter that helped women leaving abusive homes. The first time I walked through the doors, my chest tightened, but as I listened to those women share their stories, I realized we were all fighting different battles against the same kind of cruelty. And the thing about healing? It multiplies when you help others find theirs. One night, after a long volunteer shift, I came home, poured some tea, and found myself scrolling through old photos, the few that had survived Linda's purge. There was one of Mom holding me at the beach, her hair tangled by the wind, her face half lit by the setting sun. I whispered, "I made it, Mom. I really did." For the first time, that memory didn't hurt. It felt warm, like she was still here proud. As for Daniel, we never rushed anything. It wasn't about filling an empty space. It was about building something real, slowly, intentionally. He understood the silences, the pauses, the moments I needed to step back. And I realized that trust wasn't about believing someone would never hurt you. It was about knowing you could survive if they did. One Sunday morning, Dad, Daniel, and I went to the farmer's market. We laughed, bought too many strawberries, and took pictures together. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. Later that night, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights shimmer, and for the first time in years, my heart felt steady. Linda's shadow was gone. The grief was softer now, more like a scar than a wound. And I knew something that I hadn't understood before. The real revenge isn't making your enemies suffer. It's living so well that they become irrelevant. That was my justice. That was my freedom.
If someone had told me years ago that the woman who once called me a burden would be the reason I found my strength, I wouldn't have believed them. But that's how life works. It breaks you in the exact places you're meant to grow from. It's been almost 2 years now. 2 years since my stepmother walked out of our lives and everything she built on lies finally collapsed. 2 years since I stood in that lawyer's office shaking but unbroken. Sometimes I still think about her, not with hate, not with pity, just distance. Like remembering an old scar. You don't feel the pain anymore, but you remember where it came from. My life now is calm, simple, whole. My business has grown more than I ever expected. I work with people who treat me with kindness, not power. I built a team, mostly women, and I make sure every single one of them knows they are valued, something I wish someone had reminded me of back then. My father's health is better. He's stopped blaming himself, and sometimes when we sit together, he tells stories about my mom that I'd never heard before. Like how she once stayed up all night sewing a dress for me because the store ran out of my size. Or how she told him, "Sarah will always be okay. She's made of fight and heart." I used to think being made of fight meant always being ready for war. But now I know it means standing your ground with grace. As for Daniel, he's still in my life. We've built something slow and steady, a relationship without games, without fear. I told him everything eventually, every dark corner of that story, and he didn't flinch. He just said, "You went through hell, but you came out gold." I laughed when he said that, but deep down I knew it was true. One evening last month, I found one of my old journals. The first entry was from the night I left home, pages filled with anger, heartbreak, and confusion. I almost didn't recognize that girl's handwriting. Her words shook. She begged to be seen, to be believed, to be loved. I read it all, then turned to the last page and wrote, "You got everything you needed, not from them, but from yourself." That's the thing about betrayal. It strips you down to who you really are. It forces you to meet the version of yourself you've been avoiding. And that woman? She's stronger than anyone ever gave her credit for. If you've been through something like this, if someone you trusted shattered you, I want you to know this. You will heal. Not by pretending it didn't happen, but by surviving it so completely that it no longer defines you. One day, you'll wake up and realize the war is over. You'll stretch, make your coffee, feel sunlight on your face, and realize that peace doesn't feel like victory. It feels like freedom. I lost my stepmother. I lost my innocence. But I found my power. And that's a trade I'd make again.